All right, welcome to the podcast,
Thank you for having me.
Finding Your Grit. Mellissah Smith from Robotic Marketer. Thank you for joining me.
I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. So, real quick introduction. So, the idea behind this podcast is for business leaders like you and I to share stories of things that actually have happened to us, so that maybe young entrepreneurs and other leaders can learn. What it's not is us giving people advice. I personally hate people telling me what to do, and I think most entrepreneurs do as well. And I really feel like when I was a young entrepreneur, no one was telling me how hard this was really going to be. And even as I've learned my way through the business owning process, and with the evolution of social media, it looks like everybody's doing amazing and it's so easy and they're so cool. And it's just not, right? And
Absolutely.
So I wanted to create a place where young entrepreneurs and leaders could go and learn what it's really like from real life stories. And you and I have both either are in EO or have been in EO.
Yeah. Certainly, I was in for a few decades yourself, for quite a long time. So it's, that journey of being around people that are similar to us is something that we not only can learn from, but it's a really unique experience.
Yeah. So EO is an entrepreneurs organization with 12,000 members around the world, chapters in every major city, and I was a member for a long time. And this idea of learning from other people's experiences versus giving advice is where I kind of learned that idea, and I'm trying to bring that through this podcast to other people. So I'm not here to promote my company or yours, although we'll probably talk a little bit about that in our stories. And I really want to give people like a peek behind the curtain of what it's like to be an entrepreneur and the kind of the hard things that we work through. So I'm going to ask you some questions. I might tell a story along with you, hopefully.
Fantastic.
So I think the first one that I love to hear about is, have you ever been fired from a job? What did it feel like at the time? And then what happened over time when you looked back, and how did that affect kind of your decisions about your life's journey?
Yeah, I think everyone's been fired at some point in their career, some more so than others. I started my first business when I was 25, so there was only a short window to be in that position. But I've certainly been fired. Many years ago, I've moved to a place in Australia called the Gold Coast, and I got a job in a retail store it sold jewellery to the masses. And I'd had a bit of experience not working in retail, but working in marketing for jewellery retail companies. I'd done ads for De Beers and Tag Heuer, so really big, luxurious brands. I needed to take this job because I couldn't find another. And I think everyone's been in that situation where they've had to take a position that really isn't a good fit for lots of reasons, or really doesn't follow that path of what their dreams are. Yeah. And I, took this job, tried my best, I was the top salesperson every single day for 2 weeks, which really makes sense that I did become an entrepreneur, some years later. And I got fired. The boss called me into the office and said, "You're not a good fit."
Ouch.
Yeah, heartbreaking. I cried and cried, and I cried for days. So it wasn't like, just in that moment. It was just really devastating. For young people, it's that rejection. It's I'm not good enough, or what went wrong, and just not really knowing what happens in that sort of situation. Interesting enough, she fired me because she was a paid employee in one of their many retail stores. And you can't have a new person coming in with no experience being the top salesperson every single day. And so that made sense that she fired me. And that's the lesson you learn much later in life. And it's something that's really stuck with me because, you look at employees that come along the journey And you may have a manager that might want someone on their team because maybe, just maybe, they're better than them, or maybe they're outshining them in a particular area. And we need to make sure that that doesn't happen in our own businesses. And I think for me, that was really the big lesson that I learned.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I was a lot man at a Toyota dealership when I was 17. And my job was to take the new cars that come off the truck, get them cleaned up and ready for sale. And when they hired me on piecework. And they're like, okay, for every car that you do fully, it's going to be $9. You know, and I would come in at 6 o'clock in the morning and I would do the whole truck before the other guys that I worked with even got in.
Yeah.
And my first paycheck was something ridiculous, like $1,700 for 2 weeks. And my boss came out to me and he said, hey, I'm taking you off of piecework and putting you on salary. Right. And I was like, oh my God, are you serious? And that, I think that was the first time that I started thinking about being an entrepreneur. Right. I was like, wait a minute. I'm way more productive than anyone else, but they want to put me in that box. And I think, you know, that's part of, I think as I grew, this idea that maybe I should be responsible for the whole thing and make my own money. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's
a good lesson.
Yeah.
Or insights that we sort of gain from being in experiences that we may not have chosen to be in.
Yeah. And I also love the idea that you talked about taking a job that you didn't really want, but you had to. Oh man. I took a job as a salesman when I got out of the military. You know, when I was in the military, I was an Army officer, so I had people that respected me, right? They took direction from me, they saluted me, whatever. This like kind of built-in false leadership
false environment, right?
And when I got out of the military, I was a sales guy, and man, did people treat me like crap. I mean, I can't tell you how many people said, yes, I'll meet you, and then never showed up in my first year. It was just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
You know, and making that transition was no fun. All right, I'm going to ask you another interesting question, which is, have you ever been in a situation where you just felt like you wanted to quit? Like you just wanted to throw in the towel, be done, start over, do something else? And what happened?
Yeah, I think I've been in that position many times. And I think that's for everyone, right?
Yeah.
There's whether you're a kid at school and you're trying baseball for the first time and maybe you're not very good at it. And so you give up, or just, you know, sometimes luck doesn't go your way. And no matter how much hard work you do, it just doesn't come together. I have had a number of startups in my career. And, you know, they're hard work. And when you have one startup and it becomes successful really fast, and if that's the first journey you're on, that's your expectation because that's the only perspective that you have. Yeah. And so it's, you know, I have a company, Marketing Eye, and I started it when I was 30. And my business that I'd already had was, you know, I had started when I was 25 and it was successful from the get-go. So really, really lucky. But Marketing Eye took ages to get off the ground. And in fact, you know, this whole concept of outsourced marketing department or fractional CMO was, you know, people weren't using those terms back then. Yeah. And this is like 20 years ago. And so I found it really hard to get customers because their perspective was, well, we should hire that person in-house.
Right.
And we're like, well, actually, you don't need to do that. And you need all of these other skills, whether it's graphic design or web or video or PR or marketing. And you can't roll that up into one person. And I failed, honestly, the first 3 years. I just didn't get it right. And then something changed. And, you know, the business skyrocketed. But absolutely in those first 3 years, I wanted to give up. And I had an investor who wouldn't let me give up. And so that's a really interesting thing is as an entrepreneur, you know, we're taught to never, ever give up. And I have a mentor that hones that into me all the time, never, ever give up. And so I think it's naturally part of who we are to be in that position where we make a choice that maybe this isn't working out and maybe I'm going to go back to my old job because that's easier.
Right.
You we've all been there, and it doesn't matter how successful you are in life. I'm sure people that are 60 years of age that are starting new businesses feel the same way. It is, it requires a long-term view. Startups shouldn't be about, well, what can I accomplish in 12 months? If I don't hit that milestone or where I think I'm going to be, do I just give up or do I keep going? Well, we know if you keep going, you're more likely to be more successful. I think that's a really good lesson.
Yeah. My favorite saying, and people that have talked to me have heard this many times, but I always say everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Right? And so,
Such a good saying.
So every business I've been in, I've had an initial idea of what it was going to be and how it was going to work and what the offering was. And not one time was that prescription exactly what happened. And so I feel like my ability to pivot, even if it's slightly, to address the business in a way that makes customers want to buy it is one of the things that has made me successful. And I think I've seen other entrepreneurs who can't pivot. They stick with their original idea, and ultimately, it gets them in trouble.
The Kodak moment.
Yeah, the Kodak moment, right? Like, it's time for change. And my firm, C360, has been working on that idea that you just talked about, the fractional CMO, the team of subject matter experts that helps run marketing for clients. And we had a hard time making that pitch as well. And something that happened recently that was really interesting was a client had a director of marketing who resigned and went to another firm. And she didn't have time to do the search, find the new person, get them on board in 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks it just doesn't happen. Yeah. It's crazy
impossible.
that's even culturally acceptable. But anyway, 2 weeks. So when she told me about it, this is a CEO, I just said, why don't we put one of my team members in there, in that seat, 2 or 3 days a week, and let us look at it from an outsider's perspective. And I mean, we found so many things that needed to be changed. And so it helped me see more clearly how that fractional offer can be helpful to a client. How do you sell that idea?
I suppose, depending on what market you're going for, that fractional CMO is something that we do, but we're not sort of in your league in that space. We're more an outsourced marketing department. So I think the fractional CMO is more likely to be taken up today because, one, people know what it is. They know what it means. They also know the cost of a CMO. It's your 6 figures.
Yeah.
And that's a lot for a small business to pay, a medium-sized business, and even larger businesses having that budget to be able to have someone with the skills and qualifications to be able to make a difference to your business and to bring something to the table from the get-go. Yeah. And so that's really important, I think. From us, we're outsourced marketing department. I mean, I don't work in that business today. I'm in the tech business, but certainly I look at how they work. People are looking for a team to help them. And I actually see that the market's going to change from hiring marketers in-house to more of that outsourcing of certainly the fractional CMO who can really help you shape what your marketing should be and what the strategy is and what the plan that needs to be executed. And also teams, to get all of those skills rather than relying on one skill. It's nothing that I hate more is when a marketer comes to me and says, I'm a graphic designer as well, but how good can you be at both?
Right. Yeah, well, the other thing that makes me think of is this idea of, I call it silver bullet marketing, where some agency says, well, this one product, let's say it's social media advertising, we do just this one product, and this one product is going to solve all your problems, right? Like, that's not how marketing works.
No.
And I think, when we start an engagement, we might start on social media, but then we get that dialed in and baked in. There's other things to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think so often maybe it's through media, maybe it's through just chatting to people that, maybe you might say, well, I make all my money out of Instagram. And so instantly, if I don't know a lot about marketing, I'm going to walk away and go, we need to throw all of our budget into Instagram because that's what works. And we see that cycle happen quite a lot, particularly in those entrepreneurial environments where everyone's talking and there are influencers. So, influencers have been around since, the start of mankind. So, there's these influencers that are telling us, oh, you should be doing this or you should buy from this person. And that really impacts our decision making. At some point you have to take a step back and say, well, what is in the best interest of my business or of my brand?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this shift pivot idea, and you've made a pretty big one, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you talk a little bit about like what made you decide to stand up Robotic Marketer? What was behind all that?
Yeah. So I've now been in marketing for 3 decades. That really ages me. And over that time, I always wanted to be the best at marketing. It was always the thing that I was most passionate about. The first thing I realized early on is you're never going to be the best, but you can be great. And if you can be happy with being great, that actually is enough. And usually it's the person slowest to getting to the end point that actually wins the race. So when I had been working with marketers over a couple of decades at that point, I realized that we all have shortfalls. We're not great at every single area of marketing. Whether you have 2 years experience or 20 years experience, your skills are variable. You might be more skewed to communications, you might be more skewed to social media or demand generation. And that was a real problem when you're working with companies that are relying on you to help them navigate their marketing budget, help them navigate their business, and marketing such a pivotal area of building a business and of growing a business. That I started thinking about, well, what else can we do? How can I solve this problem? My people would take 4 weeks to 6 weeks to develop a strategy.
Right.
And that's a long period of time. When a customer comes to you, they want it yesterday. They're only coming to you because I need leads, or my competitors outperforming us in this particular market, or I need to grow my business because I want to sell it. And so they're coming to you for a reason. But when you're waiting 4, 6, 8 weeks to get them a plan in place, they get a bit itchy feet and they're like, well, what's going on? Why don't I have something? I'm seeing nothing. And they get disillusioned, and that carries on for a lot longer than that period of time. And it's sort of a residual that you have to deal with that relationship with that client. The other thing is marketers, that pressure of producing a strategy that's good enough is really, really high. So how do you deal with that? I had been working in technology marketing since I was 25 years of age. So I had a really good understanding. I'm a natural nerd. So I was able to really understand, well, what's the paradigm we're working under? And when AI came about or was more publicized, I started thinking, well, how does that affect my business? What role can that play? And I was really fortunate enough to see a robotics project for an agricultural company and from a university. And from that, I'm like, well, I really want to do that. That's something I want to do. How does robotics and AI work in my business? And I had a light bulb moment when a person with 20 years experience who was brand new to our company produced a 4-page marketing strategy after a month's work. So you're looking at 160 hours. I'm in consulting. That's how I think. To come up with 4 pages. And it wasn't really good. It was generic. It could be for anyone. And so I started that journey. I built a prototype. Obviously, I can't code. So I had to go out and do that within the university. Then when I realized that you could automate every single area of marketing to produce a strategy, and at that point that hadn't been done, I was able to then take the concept and the blueprint from that and actually rebuild it again with better platforms, better security and technology. And then also look at integrating, well, we have all this data accessible to us. It's not just the internet, which is where ChatGPT grabs from, but it's also your CRM, your marketing automation, your email marketing, Google, your social media platforms, your advertising. All those areas are really valuable data, and it's very hard for a marketer or even an analyst to sit there and work with Excel, which would be the only other platform you would use, to be able to work out, well, what's industry best practice? Where are we benchmarking? Where are, predictive analysis on what we could be doing better? And we were able to build that. We've got a very talented team, and they were able to build a software that's AI-powered marketing strategy technology platform that automates the development of strategy. So it develops, manages, executes, and reports on marketing strategy performance all in one. And so for me as a marketer, my proudest moment was when I was able to pivot, and I was able to see that very first strategy come out of the system. Now, the first strategy came out of the prototype. So bear in mind, it was a prototype and it was absolute garbage.
Yeah.
But it still proved the point that it could be done. Now, thanks to ChatGPT, everyone knows that AI can do these things. And so, we were talking about those struggles as you're starting off a new business. I started a business and COVID hit. People were like, I don't think AI could actually develop a strategy. This mindset and this quantum leap where everyone changes their mind because of this one solution. And that is absolutely ChatGPT, that it was the game changer, particularly when it comes to business.
Well, we talked about this a little bit before the podcast, but there's some bias, right? There's people that have bias against AI, ChatGPT, just like there were people that had bias against social media when it first came out, right? Like, oh, social media is bad for you. It doesn't help with marketing. Like, there's all these preconceived notions. And I think my interest in robotic marketer and AI is the ability to gather and process all this information in real time that used to take human beings months and months and months and then by the time the strategy was built, 3 months had gone by and things might have changed, right? It could be out of date.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by that and the work that we did together with today about how you enter the information into ChatGPT to get good information out was fascinating.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out. And I think, that's a term accountants use. It's a term that people in CRM use and marketers and technology people use. It's so true. What information you feed it is what you're going to get out. So feeding really good information, being detailed, being precise, it's really helpful for getting the right information out. And with strategy, you're right. COVID happened, right? And so everyone had to pivot, or so many companies fell to the wayside because of COVID. Now, in theory, if you have your strategy on a platform that uses AI, it can actually predict those market trends or what's going to happen to your business. Is there going to be a demand? And how do you change your marketing habits to ascertain that? And I mean, ultimately, it might tell you to change your product, not our software, let's be precise.
Yeah.
But there would be software out there that's being built today and perhaps released, but we just don't know about it, that tells us, well, when this happens, this is where you need to change your product or your service or your solution that you're offering so that you can take advantage of the changing market conditions. And, for me, that's really game-changing. It's helping people become more successful, but also allowing people the freedom to be more creative.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we would spend so much time doing research and building strategies that clients could barely afford to pay for the execution, right? Because you consumed so many hours doing it.
Right.
I think so. Something that I learned working with you today was this idea that, you go into ChatGPT and you ask it a question like, hey, build a marketing strategy for XYZ company. And this thing spits out. Well, that's garbage in and garbage out because AI has no context. But when I say, hey, here's the language that the client uses and here's what the audience cares about and learn from these examples of brands that we love. So after 4 or 5 or 6 questions and answers through all of a sudden the output was 95% right.
Yeah.
And so just that couple of iterations, I think, is what needs to be known to break the bias, right? Because I think there are people on my team who are biased against AI, but I think the bias comes from them not understanding how to use it and it being new versus, whether it works or not.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important learning for me this month. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it's natural to not want change. It's natural to have some sort of fear, particularly if you're an employee. How is this going to take over my role?
Yeah.
A lot of people are talking about, is it going to do exactly what happened in the manufacturing industry?
Right.
And to a degree, yes, it is.
Yeah.
But it's going to make your role different. So you won't lose your role. You'll still have a job, but you have to adapt with the times. You have to learn how to use AI to produce better results.
Yeah.
And also, from a marketer's perspective, it's super exciting because you actually get to spend more time being creative and doing the things that you love in marketing, the reason you got into marketing.
Yeah.
Rather than the administrative type of, areas of marketing that exist.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, like the project management, data collection, the stuff that consumes a lot of hours but doesn't really create the output or the campaign or whatever is fascinating. It's funny, we really went on like a tangent about AI away from kind of the general topic, but people care about it. Maybe someone learned something from it. I don't know.
You never know.
We can talk, but so I'm going to kind of try and shift us back a little bit to this idea of telling stories. So this idea of finding your grit, to me is like, there are 1 or 2 or 3 times in my life where, I had to dig deep to figure out my next move.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to start selling this widget instead of that widget. It was like, wow, I need to make a major pivot. And one of the things that I learned was this idea that if you own a business and you own 51% or more, you own the business, and if you own 49% or less, you don't own the business. Right. So I got into a battle with a previous business partner where I learned this really hard lesson. And I remember, in all the conversations that I had leading up to how that business got structured, this idea of like, well, we got each other's back. Yeah. I just won 51% because, of something, whatever it was. And me thinking that those reasons were good enough to accept 49.
Yeah.
Right. Have there been any times in your life where you've like had to learn that kind of lesson the hard way, or have you always been smart enough to know I'm 51 or I'm not playing?
I won't say I was smart enough, but I've always been 51.
Good.
And that may not always be the right decision. I once had a very successful businessman say to me, Mellissah, as long as you're 50-50, then you're equally in the game.
Yeah.
And that's a really important lesson, but it's hard for entrepreneurs to allow someone to have 50-50 to share, the toys.
Yeah.
And, for me, it's something that I've remembered always. Yeah. However, I also have seen a lot of divorces and, I'm talking business divorces and personal divorces. Yeah. And unless you have 51%, you could end up killing a business. You could kill that brand loyalty. You can kill your reputation.
Yeah.
And so I've always made sure that from 25 years of age that I have 51%.
Yeah.
And so that's quite intuitive, but, for me, I've, being a female in business, I've always been able to have people around me that are smarter than me, more successful than me, that have really guided me and shared stories like what we're sharing today. That's been really pivotal in helping me make better decisions when it comes to business structures. Yeah. And one of the things I would say to any person starting a business, get your structure right first. Get your trust set up. Make sure your IP's in a different company. All of these things that we've probably learned over the years, whether it's from EO or from having wise people around us, making those decisions. You see people all the time, failing, but not necessarily because their business, they didn't have a good product or they didn't have a good service. Sometimes it's because their structure's really bad.
Yeah.
And so making sure you get that right up front can be really helpful. And a great example is when COVID happened, back to that structure, is depending on how your company is structured is whether you got grants and financial contributions in that, really hard time for a lot of companies. Yeah. So, for me, I've been in situations and seen situations that have really opened my eyes to going, well, being in a situation where you don't have the power, or if you're investing in a business, you've got to be prepared to lose that money. If you're investing 20%, you've got to be prepared to throw that money away. Yeah. And if you get lucky, you get lucky. But if you don't, you don't. And I think that's a great lesson for everyone, really.
Yeah. The one I remember, which they don't teach you in college, is, you're 50-50 partners with someone and you get to a point where the business needs money. Uh-huh. And then there's this thing called a capital call, right? So now in order for the business to continue, we each have to put in $100,000. And my business partner is a very wealthy person, and for him, $100,000 is nothing. Mm-hmm. And for me, I've already got a second mortgage on my house and 10 credit cards that got me to this point. I can't do it. Mm-hmm. What happens?
I've used that before.
I get diluted.
Yeah. So I've used that before, where I've been in the stronger position. And, looking back, it's not a nice move.
Yeah.
I was advised by, people that do that for a profession. So, I didn't know it until that moment that was a maneuver you could make.
Yeah.
And for me, I think one of the big things is how is that contract structured? Who has voting rights? And also to always understand the financial situation of all stakeholders. Yeah. Robotic Marketer has a business partner who's way wealthier than me, and at any day could have done that. Yeah. So just making sure that you really are in bed with your business partners.
Yeah. Yeah. Another interesting one was this idea of how you handle taxes, right? So the business is going to generate a K-1 in most cases that's going to go on your return.
Yeah.
And then where does the money to pay those taxes come from? Well, I've learned that you need to bake that into your operating agreement so that everyone's handled the same way, right?
Well, I've just learned something today, so that was great.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, that was interesting. So I guess the last question is really this idea of like, what's the big life pivot, whether it's business or personal, that you kind of remember the most, that you could tell us in kind of a story format? Like, what's the big shift that you've made in your career?
I've made a few shifts. When I turned 30, I thought I was very old. And, what am I going to do next? And whether, marketing or having a full-time business was for me, because of course I'm going to have babies and get married and all of these sorts of things, which never happened. But I was preparing for it. So that's why I started the whole, outsourced marketing team idea, because I thought, well, people that are married, obviously very old school and really not politically correct today to say this, and an absolute reason to get cancelled. But in my mind, it's like when you get married, you can only work part-time. And so how does that actually work? So, starting that business was a pivot and a change. I obviously never walked that path myself, but it changed my mindset. My old way of operating wouldn't have worked in a different environment had I had different, a marriage and children around me. The second one would be, COVID. Really, really difficult time for everyone. For me, it was more difficult in terms of, businesses. I was running 3 businesses at the time, and all 3 of them were hugely impacted by COVID. All of a sudden, all of our retainers were put on hold. Now, we can't say to a company, oh, you can't put that on hold because you have a 2-year agreement or a 12-month agreement. When you've built a relationship with this person and they're hurting, so you've got to have some compassion and understanding in that situation. And in fact, probably in our case, we had too much compassion and too much understanding. So all of a sudden, I realized, one, I had returned to Australia and I was in lockdown, the harshest lockdowns in history, in the world. And I was at home and I'm running 3 businesses and I'm waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do one country and then working late into the evening to do other countries. And it was really a difficult point in time, and to lose so many retainers on top of that and so many businesses pausing, I learned a really valuable lesson. I didn't pivot fast enough.
Yeah.
I was never going to change my company to being a pure digital play in my consulting services, because I was against that. I'm against the idea that you only do digital marketing. Right. You know, that to me is not how any business should be looking at their marketing. They should be looking at traditional and digital and really seeing what is the best for them based on their budget and resources. And so I didn't make that change, and it hurt. And it was really the hardest period of time I've ever had in business. And it was really hard to get myself out of that, to sort of pull myself away and look at it from a different perspective. Eventually, I just woke up one day and said, you know, my world is not the worst environment to be in. In fact, it's quite good. I need to change myself and work on myself to be able to create a difference to what I'm doing. And then really it just turned around like that. Yeah. And I say that because it really did. It wasn't like it didn't turn around for another 6 months. It literally turned around. So another reminder, your mindset is everything. The way that you're viewing your life, the way that you work, the people around you. And also, what do you need to get that energy? What do you need to be energized enough to be more successful? The more energy we have, the more successful we are. Weird, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that reminds me of a very similar situation. So I bought a PR agency in January of 2019. Mm-hmm. And then the pandemic came roaring in. And yeah, we lost almost all of our retainer clients that were in that acquisition, or the budgets got cut in half or a quarter or whatever. And, you know, my philosophy on contracts is that it doesn't matter what the paper says. If the client doesn't want to or can't, then there's no sense in fighting over it, right? You want to maintain those relationships and continue the business going. So, and the other thing at that time for us was that our offering was very convoluted, right? I had a direct response marketing agency that bought a PR firm, and the idea was that there could be some kind of consolidated offering, and the customers from both sides, whether it was the PR side or the direct response side, were confused about who we were. We tried to change the name, the rebrand didn't work. And I mean, in my mind, I was in that same place. I'm like, this thing is going nowhere. No matter how hard we work at it, my idea was flawed. Like it literally was flawed, and COVID didn't help. So I've got to do something, you know? And I ended up making the decision to close the company. Right?
Yeah.
It was
That's
just,
hard.
it was hard. But the thought behind it was, I'm going to have 2 companies. I'm going to have a full service marketing agency called C360, and I'm going to have a direct response marketing agency called the Victory 360 Agency. And I'm going to market those brands separately to the outside world. We did it, and both businesses are growing like crazy. Everyone's happy. The market's back. But I really felt at one point like I can't figure this out. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make it. But I would sit there and think to myself, am I going to get a job working for someone? Never. Like, I just can't do it. Yeah. I got to figure this out. You know?
So I walked into my mentor's office during COVID. And my mentor, I've been really fortunate through EO. I ended up with a WPO as a mentor. And he's one of the most successful people on the planet. So really scored there. But he's also a really good friend. And I walked into his office and I burst into tears. And I suppose men don't do that so much. But as a woman, I burst into tears. And I said, everything's so heavy. Oh, my God, how have we felt like this? Like, we know that sometimes things do get too much, and sometimes you're the only person that is needing to manage through that process and get out the other side. And I just felt heavy. I had a tech startup, really difficult. There's a lot of wages in, technology companies. Then they don't come cheaply to get a data scientist or machine learning expert or a Python software developer. And, I had marketing companies. I had to let go somebody who'd been with me for 17 years. And so there's all these things that were happening at the time, but it taught me a lot. And I think most times when we go through something that's really, really hard, and that was really hard for me to go through, I was also doing IVF just to add to the complexity. And that, of course, failed as well. So I had all of these things moving around, and trying to handle it all, by yourself is really difficult. But most entrepreneurs feel like that. Yeah. And they feel like that over and over again until they get their mindset right and say, well, this is a game. But people are involved. So play, be nice in that game, but it's still a game. And you've got maneuvers, and you can make decisions, and you can play harder or you can play softer, but it's a game. And back to, you need a game plan. But as long as you've got that, it allows you to really get the most out of our careers, whether we're entrepreneurs or we work for somebody else. Yeah. It really allows us to feel fulfilled, and also to be able to manage the obstacle and challenges that come in our way, whether it's a difficult person or, if you're an employee or even if you're an employer, you see someone who you feel is not competent at something, it helps you look at their perspective. Like, are they having a bad time at home? Have they not been onboarded properly? There's all these different factors, but without having these experiences where everything's on our shoulders, where we're having to dig ourselves out, we really don't get that perspective.
Yeah. When I was, my first job out of the Army, I ended up in a role where I had total quality management was part of my job. And the thing I learned from that was this idea that wherever you are is the baseline, and then your job is to just make incremental improvements over time. And so I had to learn to stop judging myself on wherever that baseline was. Like, even if I've said to my team, even if we're 4 feet underwater, if tomorrow we're only 3 feet underwater, that's still progress. That's something we should be proud of, right? And that helps me kind of keep it in perspective. Like, my job is to figure out where we are and try and take the first next step forward. And I've done that many times to kind of save myself psychologically. And the other thing that I heard from one of my competitors in town, it's called Planet Advertising, and the CEO's name is Matt Dowd, and he was one of my fellow EO people. And we were at a discussion panel, and he was sitting on the panel, and somebody asked him, like, if there was one thing that you learned along the way that you think could help other people, what would it be? And he said, learn fast and forget fast. Yeah. Right. And so this idea that like, we made a mistake, we lost a client. Yeah. Okay, what did I learn? Look forward, move on, get the stuff done, because the weight of those things that you go through that are hard can really weigh you down when there's not much you can do about it sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as entrepreneurs, we often have bad days. They're going to come up whether we like it or not. Yeah. And no matter how good we are at processing a bad day, it's still a bad day. Being able to train yourself to wake up the next morning and forget yesterday and treat every single day as a fresh start is a really unique capability. Something I've put a lot of work into, but I'm a strong believer in. If you can wake up every single day and it's a completely fresh day, yes, you may have some things to do, but it's fresh. It allows you to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah. I'm totally on board with that. I love the idea. And I was thinking about one of the things that I learned during COVID was this idea that if I'm working on things that I'm not good at or I don't like, that's going to drain my energy, and I'm not going to have the energy for the things that I'm good at. And so one of the things that I did during COVID was I just made the decision to start putting people in the seats, the right seats, for the things that I don't like to do because they still needed to get done.
Yeah.
And when I did that, I mean, like all of a sudden I'm full of energy again. I'm happy again. And so I think understanding yourself and what you're good at and making sure that's what you focus on is really important part of how I get through the day.
I can totally relate to that. I use AI rather than people. But, I can do a week's work in a few hours using AI. And that gives me energy because I'm all excited. One, I've accomplished something. How good does it feel when you accomplish something?
Yeah.
And so you get that quick fix of, I've accomplished something already today. And if you can do that early on, it allows you this freedom to think differently and to be creative. I always go back to being creative because for me, that's my personal, superpower. If I'm creative, I feel energized, I feel happy, and I share it with everyone. Yeah. And that's the person I want to be. And so, but to get to that point, we still have to do work. Yeah. And so everyone who thinks that life's just glorious all the time, it's not that way for any person. Right. You really do have to do some work. And in my case, I use AI for that. And honestly, it's a game changer.
Yeah. Do you have any questions for me? Anything that you want to talk about that I didn't bring up?
Yeah, definitely. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned in your career?
Man, I'll just say out loud that I learn everything the hard way, right? Mm-hmm. Like I have to bang my head really hard 3 times to learn a lesson. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I am really taking in right now is that the way I see the world is like I give everyone 100% credit for being a good, clean human being, right? And I expect nothing but the best from them, and I trust everyone. Mm-hmm. And that gets me in trouble, right? Because I'm not looking for red flags or areas of concern, right? I'm more of a motivator, and what's happened to me a couple times in my career is I've either partnered up with people or had customer vendor relationships with people that I shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And I've had other people around me who have said, there's something up with that person. Yeah. And we're not sure what it is, but have you thought about such and such? And I've ignored that advice to learn the hard way that I shouldn't have trusted them. And so a good example of how I'm putting that into my life today is when we hire people now, it used to be they do the initial screening and I make the final decision. Mm-hmm. Now I do the initial screening and make sure that people are qualified. I feel like they're a good cultural fit. And then I turn it over to the team. Yeah. And I let them decide who the final candidate is going to be. And we just did this with a new AE. And I was so sure it was the other person.
Oh, wow.
I was so sure. And I pushed them so hard. And they fought back valiantly and won. And so we hired Ellen. And now that we've made the decision, they were 100% right. And I'm not going to get into why, but there were things that I was overlooking for bad reasons, or not bad reasons, but just because of my personality, right? And I wasn't seeing the what we really needed in that role. And they did a great job hiring her.
I've had similar experience. We did the same switch, and I don't know whether we've both read it somewhere. That's what you should be doing. Yeah. But I've certainly made that change as well, and it's for the better of the business. Yeah. Every time I make a decision by myself, I fail. It's not a strength, recruiting. Yeah. And, for us, it's really important. We can teach people everything else, but we can't teach them to be passionate about marketing. And you think that that's a given if they're going into a career in marketing, but it's not. Likewise with technology. If they're just doing, they studied technology as a degree, a computer science as a degree, and therefore they have to get a job in that field, and they're just doing the job, then you're not going to have amazing results in your technology. They're just going to do the bare minimum. Yeah. But what you're looking for is that creative idea of them bringing something to the table with, what about if you did this, or what if you did that? And you kind of miss that if you don't have people that are passionate. And it's very hard to gauge that. And I think when you're entrepreneurs, we're looking at so many different factors, and maybe some of our day is coming with us into that interview. Or maybe we're expecting a mirror image of ourselves where someone's got high energy and they're telling us everything we want to know, but perhaps that's bipolar, not really. But, this idea of, two personalities, we all have our professional personality and then we have our friend's personality. But this works for everyone, whether you're going for a job interview or you're winning an award or you're singing on a stage. Yeah. This idea of dual personalities exists. And so what I'm finding is when you say, well, actually I like these people, how about you interview them? Quite often they're saying, no, not in your life. And it's such an interesting take. I'm like, well, why don't you like them?
Yeah.
They're smart and they communicate well. And then they'll say something that's really profound that actually means something to our business. And sometimes it's just culture. If you don't fit the culture, it's hard to flourish as a team. It's hard to thrive.
Yeah. Well, so one of the people in our crew is Matt. He's behind one of the cameras. And so I want to, pick on him and use him as a little bit of an example. But Matt was very young, but he had like this raw talent that was coming through. And he had done some work in the social media space, but it wasn't like his primary job.
Right.
But I just saw this raw talent and excitement, and I found out that he was raised by an entrepreneur, right?
Oh.
So his dad was self-employed.
Conversations at the table.
Right. So when I took the leap, I hired Matt or whatever, but one of the things I love about him is like I can give him constructive criticism and he just takes it really well. So like I've learned like that's something that I need in my team is just to be able to say, hey, 80% of what just happened was amazing. I want to work on this 20% with you, and here's the 2 things I want you to focus on.
Yeah.
Or Matt will tell you, I usually have 3. Like I work in the world of 3s. Like let's get the 3 biggest things figured out, and we'll worry about all the little stuff later. That 20% that we talked about. So, yeah, I think I see some strengths, but I also have blind spots, and so balancing that with having my employees help is really cool.
Yeah. And I think it's a team effort, right? That this idea that the leader, everything falls on the leader, shouldn't be a case. I'm a strong believer in a flat organizational structure where we're all colleagues and we all contribute and we work as a team to get a goal. And sometimes we don't reach that goal, but let's work out as a team why we didn't reach it and whether we do need to reach it or not.
Yeah.
And so there's changing of philosophies and ways that we're running our businesses, that business modeling that we're utilizing to achieve or accomplish set goals.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking a little bit about was this idea of, I don't know are you fully virtual? Or do you still have?
Oh, no. I'm old school. I still like going to the office. I still like having people around me. Yeah. And in fact, I'm a person who can't work from home. Yeah. I just don't have that capability. And I kind of like going to the office and then going home and never thinking about work until I go back to the office. Yeah. And as an entrepreneur where you've got so many things racing around in your head, for me that works. It doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I really like the virtual. I mean, I would say we're pretty far on the extreme in that we're virtual. We're also somewhat asynchronous, meaning that I'm not like, it's not like punch in at 8, leave at 4, right? It's more like, is the client saying I love it? Is the team members getting what they need from you on time? And then I kind of don't worry about the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe I should, I don't know, but to me it's too much to think about. Every other Friday off, so they work 4 10s, 5 8s.
Oh, you're a great boss.
Yeah, and then we do crazy stuff like we'll be like, if 4th of July was a Tuesday, fuck it, we're gonna take Monday off too, and so I love all that, but the thing that I'm a little bit, there's 2 things that I'm having trouble dealing with. One is if I'm in a meeting with 5 people in my team, and they're like looking at their email or their text or their social media while I'm talking, I can't tell. And then after the meeting, they asked me the same damn question that I just answered on the call, right? So there's some loss in communication and productivity because people get distracted. And I do it too. Like I catch myself like, what? Like Matt's saying something important or Rich is trying to make a point, and here I am looking at my text message that I just got, right? Like, so that's one thing I talk to the team about. We have to figure out a way to work on. And then the other thing is that thing, like if you and I are in the same office, I can just like, hey, Mellissah, quick, clarification, right?
Yeah.
Like making it so everyone on the team can basically barge in on their coworkers without being annoying, but getting what they need done. And those are the two kind of COVID things that I think, or virtual things now. I guess COVID's over, but that I think we still need work on.
I think in general, you're putting most bosses to shame. Certainly, I could learn a lot from you from that virtual working environment. I think it's hard. I'm probably on the sentiment that it doesn't work for every industry. Obviously, it should very much work for marketing.
Yeah.
But for me and my team, we find that productivity is much lower. If I'm at home, I know for a fact I'm doing the washing, I'm playing with the dog, and I'm going to that fridge every moment I possibly can. I'm starting cooking dinner at 3 p.m. I'm kind of feeling a little lonely and out of place. But there are some people that really thrive from working from home, and it really suits their lifestyle, but also helps them, bring up families and be really good parents.
Yeah.
And I think there's that shift of we want everyone to be good parents, and we want them, kids to grow up with parents around them. So this work from home environment really does work or play to that.
Yeah. 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 We'll see. We'll see. I mean, there's a local agency that just went out of business, and they had the coolest office space. It's right next to a brewery. It's centrally located for our team.
Yeah.
And I really started thinking about, at least fantasizing about what it would be like to be back to the office. But what happened during COVID and has happened since, so I had a couple people on my team like, we have to get an office. We have to get, and I said, okay, will you come to the office? Oh yes, absolutely. I'm going to come to the office.
Did not.
And then it's like, well, I want everybody to, if I'm going to come, I want everybody to come. I'm like, well, everybody doesn't want to come. Well, if everybody doesn't come and I have an office, are you going to come? No. Well, then why do I need an office? Right. So it's kind of, I feel like it's almost an all or nothing proposition. And it sounds like you've gone to we're open, you're going to the office side. And I've gone to we're virtual and we'll meet up at my house or clients as we need.
For some people, we do hybrid if they are good at working from home. But if it can considerably show on our balance sheet, I'll be honest, that the productivity based on that person's performance, we're in consulting, so it's easy to tell, or we're in technology and there's KPIs and goals that we've set out that we need to reach. If we're not reaching them, then that there's something wrong.
Yeah, there's something wrong,
And so in some ways it makes people more accountable for how they're spending their time. But it is nice to be able to turn to the person next to you and say, hey, what do you think of this idea? Or this didn't work. Or could you just quickly look over this and tell me if I should change something? It's obviously really easy to do that. My tech company is, very virtual. They force the point. Now, I need good tech people, and I don't have a choice but to employ people that get their own way when it comes to that. And so that's really interesting. But only the other day, one of the bosses said, perhaps if we worked from an office, we probably would reach the goals a lot faster. Yeah. And I said, well, I've been saying this all along, but remember, I'm really far with you need to go to the office type of person. So we have some people that work hybrid, but it's definitely not my preferred business model. For me, even as a leader, I find it harder. Yeah. And in some ways, they're contacting you a lot more, so they're putting a lot more tax on you in terms of your time, and I find that hard.
It's funny. I've told this story before, but in my old company, I had a lot. I had a lot of direct reports, and at one point, I just got rid of the chairs in my office, and because people would come in, sit down, we would socialize, then eventually they would get to the point, and it just was taking too much time. So I tend to be more like, Matt, Rich, team, ping me, call me, I call you back, get it done, move on, and let them get the work done. But yeah, it's interesting dynamic.
I think time will tell.
Yeah, time will tell. Well, thank you so much. So just to wrap this thing up, why don't you just give a real quick, these are my companies and this is what they do.
Well, I don't want to bore people with old school companies, so I might just stick to Robotic Marketer.
Okay.
6 years ago, I had an idea to start an AI software company that automates marketing strategy. So Robotic Marketer is a international company. It's sold all over the world. And basically it's a subscription-based business where you go in and you fill in some inputs into the technology and it spits out a 50-page marketing strategy. One of the things we say is, it develops your marketing strategy for you. And that's like a really intense 50-page marketing strategy. And that's based on a lot of different insights, your target audience, your competitors, your strengths and weaknesses, where there is opportunities in the market, and what the marketing objectives are for your actual company. It also manages your marketing strategy. So it has a digital dashboard that manages the performance of your marketing strategy. And it also gives you full view of what your competitors' performance looks like. So I think that is a really secret sauce for a lot of companies. It also spirals a bit of competitiveness in us. Like if we see a competitor doing better than we are, whether it's on socials or their website performance, it makes us want to be better. And I think that creates action. Execution, it provides you with an implementation plan. As we were speaking earlier, there is going to be an integration with ChatGPT released in the next few months, which will allow you to develop your strategy and implement your strategy to a point. You still need an agency or you still need a marketing person to create personalization and creativity and physical execution, but it certainly will get you a long way there. And then the reporting mechanism. Well, how are we performing on a week-to-week basis or on a month-to-month basis? And what does that actually mean to our company? And what should I be doing? And I need to know that. I need the actions of what I should be doing. And it does all of that. It's an end-to-end marketing strategy technology platform. It's the only one in the world today. It's, our partners like yourself, you're the only company that is developing data-driven marketing strategies. And that's a fairly cool space to be in.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you being with us. Full disclosure, I am a licensed user of Robotic Marketer, the first in the U.S.
You are.
And I have always been a data-driven person. Like I want to see what marketing we do, how it drives the business forward. It's not just some fluffy idea. It has to have a business purpose. And I love the way that Robotic Marketer shortens the cycle of research and basis building and gets us to the point where we can start talking about execution very rapidly.